The morning air clung to the iron gates like breath on glass. Elias Moreau stood still, his shoes coated in dust, as cars slid past into the estate, sleek shadows glinting with wealth. From behind the bars, laughter rippled. The kind born from comfort and ignorance. He didn't flinch when a guard barked at him to move. He only looked toward the sprawling mansion beyond the fountain, its white marble gleaming like cold arrogance. A torn envelope rested in his hand, edges softened by time. Inside, a single paper. Folded, faded, and heavier than gold. To the guests sipping champagne on the terrace, Elias was invisible. To himself, he was a ghost returning home. The gate's polished emblem read, Rosendale. His lips whispered the name like a curse, but his eyes softened, remembering a time when that name had meant belonging. He straightened his back, waited, and let their cruelty wash over him. Not yet, he thought. Let them see first what they've forgotten. Inside the mansion, Nina moved through the corridor like a shadow among chandeliers. The gossip had already spread. A beggar at the gate, holding some old paper, daring to look toward the house. She tried to ignore the sneers of the younger maids, but something in the man's eyes lingered with her. They weren't the eyes of someone begging. They were the eyes of someone remembering. As she placed fresh linen on the table, she whispered the name she'd overheard, Elias Moreau. It felt like a ghost walking back into the halls of the living. By noon, the estate glowed beneath a brittle sun. Elias remained near the fountain, motionless, his presence now an eyesore for those passing in tailored suits. Victoria descended the marble steps, irritation in every step. "If you're looking for charity," she said coldly, "you're staring at the wrong house." Elias only smiled faintly. "Not charity," he murmured. "Memory." The word unsettled her. Something about his tone, calm, certain, cut through her practiced disdain. Before she could reply, a gust scattered the mist again, and for a brief moment she felt as if the house itself was holding its breath. Charles Rosendale watched the garden through his window, the sun dripping behind the horizon. His daughter's discomfort amused him. Arrogance was a family heirloom, after all. But the name Moreau, that stirred something buried, something he'd spent decades silencing. He turned the gold signet ring on his finger, the same ring he'd once stolen along with the estate. "So," he whispered to the empty room, "the sun turns." Outside, Elias looked up at the mansion's fading glow. Unaware of the storm his presence had already awoken. As twilight settled, the world softened to blue. The guards had left, the laughter had died, but Elias remained. He touched the gate emblem again, tracing its cold grooves. From inside the envelope, he removed the folded deed. The ink shimmered faintly under streetlight. He exhaled once, slow and steady, not in triumph, but in remembrance. The wind whispered through the iron, carrying echoes of voices that once called this place home. Tomorrow, they would know his name. Tonight, he simply watched the mansion sleep. The morning broke soft and gray, the kind of light that finds secrets rather than hides them. In the servants' quarters, Lena sat at the edge of her narrow bed, an old photograph trembling in her hands. It was from the estate archives, labeled simply, Moreau, 1979. The man in the photo, Henry Moreau, looked uncannily like the stranger at the gate. Her pulse quickened as realization bloomed, fragile and dangerous. Outside, she could hear the maids chatting, unaware that history was shifting in the room beside them. Lena pressed the photo to her chest, feeling both guilt and resolve. She knew, now, why the stranger's eyes had haunted her. They were the same eyes as the man who had once owned everything around them. The Rosendale breakfast table gleamed with crystal and silence. Victoria sipped coffee, pretending not to notice her father's unread newspaper, though the headline beneath his palm read, "Inheritance Scandal." estates in question. Charles didn't speak at first. His focus lingered on the gate, visible through the glass wall. "He's still there," he muttered finally. Victoria frowned. "Why would a beggar stay when no one wants him here?" Charles folded the paper neatly. "Because he's not begging, he's waiting." The words chilled her more than the marble beneath her feet. For the first time, the mansion felt smaller, like the walls themselves were listening. Lena slipped out through the back gate, her shoes whispering across the gravel. Elias was there, seated beneath the old sycamore, eyes closed as if listening to the earth. When she spoke his name, he opened his eyes slowly, calm as sunrise. "You knew my father?" he asked, though his voice carried no demand, only longing. Lena nodded, her throat tight. "He was kind. They said he lost everything. I didn't believe it until now." Elias smiled faintly. "He didn't lose it," he said softly. "They took it." The truth hung between them like the lingering scent of rain, quiet, certain, and impossible to ignore. Victoria entered the library, searching for silence, but found ghosts instead. The scent of aged leather and dust carried whispers of the past. She traced her fingers along the spines of books her father had never read. Trophies, not knowledge. Her eyes fell upon a locked drawer in his desk, half hidden beneath ledgers. Curiosity overrode obedience. Inside, she found letters. Contracts signed by Henry Moreau, names forged, dates erased. Her breath caught. Her father's empire was built on theft. The sound of footsteps behind her made her freeze, looking for something. Charles' voice slid through the air, smooth and venomous. The night breathed differently now, alive, cautious. Lena met Elias near the fence where moonlight drew thin silver lines across the iron. She handed him the photograph, her hands trembling. "They'll come after you," she warned. Elias smiled faintly. "They already did. Long ago, he folded the picture, tucking it back into the envelope beside the deed. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of jasmine and rust. Behind them, the mansion windows flickered, light moving like restless souls. The truth was no longer hidden. It was awake. The mansion's doors opened with a groan that echoed like a confession. Elias stepped over the threshold, each step swallowing the years between belonging and exile. The marble floor shone like water beneath his boots. A servant hesitated before him, unsure whether to push him out or bow him in. "Mr. Rosendale requested workers," Elias said simply, his tone neither meek nor bold. The servant nodded reluctantly and led him deeper. Every portrait on the walls watched as he passed, faces of the stolen legacy. The house seemed to breathe, recognizing its true owner before the humans within it could. Elias didn't look back. For the first time in decades, he was inside. Victoria found him polishing the silver near the fireplace. She froze at the sight, unable to reconcile the quiet composure in his movements with the man she'd once dismissed through glass. "You again," she said, trying for authority, but sounding almost curious. Elias turned, offering a polite nod. "You keep your silver bright," he said softly. "Your father must value reflection." The remark unsettled her. It sounded less like flattery and more like indictment. "You're no ordinary worker," she said. He smiled faintly. "No, Miss Rosendale. I've done this before. Once, in a home very much like this one." Charles watched from behind his desk as Elias entered, wiping his hands clean with deliberate calm. "You work quickly," Charles said, voice smooth as aged whiskey. Elias inclined his head. "I've had practice in houses with finer foundations." Their eyes met, one of possession, one of quiet reclamation. Charles gestured toward the shelves. "Do you know who built this place?" Elias's lips curved, almost kindly. "Yes," he said. "Henry Moreau, my father." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crack the polished veneer of the room. For the first time, Charles' hand trembled slightly on his ring. Victoria stood on the balcony, the sky bleeding orange and violet. Below, Elias tended the garden as if he'd always belonged there. Her mind replayed his words, the way he'd spoken her father's name, not with fear, but with truth. When she descended, she found herself asking questions she'd never meant to ask. Was your father really the man who built this? Elias finished for her. Yes. Before your father bought what wasn't for sale. The silence stretched between them, and for the first time, Victoria looked at him without the filter of class. If it's yours, she whispered, why come back now? Elias smiled, weary but sincere. Because ghosts deserve homes too. Dinner was a masquerade of civility. Crystal glinted, wine poured, but tension hummed louder than the string quartet playing in the corner. Elias stood near the wall, a sign to serve. Charles raised his glass, his words sharp as glass. To legacy, he said. Eyes fixed on Elias. And to knowing your place. Elias placed the decanter gently before him, leaning close enough for only Charles to hear. I do know my place, he whispered. You're sitting in it. For a heartbeat, time fractured, forks froze, music faltered. Then Elias stepped back, calm, composed, leaving silence in his wake that no wealth could drown. The mansion slept uneasily. Wind scraped against the windows like old memories trying to claw their way in. In the study, Victoria paced before her father's desk, the stolen letters spread open beneath the lamplight. Elias stood quietly beside her, watching the paper tremble in her shaking hands. These signatures, she whispered. He forged them all. Elias nodded once. He did. Her voice broke. He stole everything from you. Elias's gaze remained steady. No, he said softly. He stole everything from himself. For a moment, the silence between them felt almost sacred, not accusation, but recognition. The weight of legacy shifted, and history began to breathe. Again, Charles descended the staircase with the arrogance of a man who'd built his empire on control. But this morning, control was gone. The hall below was no longer silent. Servants whispered, papers rustled, the air thick with rumor. Victoria stood waiting, the forged contracts in her hand. Elias beside her, unflinching. You lied to us, she said, voice trembling but clear. Charles smiled, brittle. I built this house. Elias stepped forward. You occupied it. My father built it. And now it returns to him, through me. Charles' eyes darkened, but the room no longer belonged to him. The truth did. By noon, the mansion's secrets had outgrown its walls. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters. The name Moreau echoed through marble halls, once reserved for the powerful. Inside, Elias sat quietly beside his lawyer, the deed placed before the judge like an unburied truth. Charles' voice filled the chamber, polished lies wrapped in confidence. But when Elias spoke, it wasn't with anger. This house, he said softly, was my father's gift to a world that betrayed him. I don't want revenge. I want his name restored. The judge leaned forward, studying the faded signature. Justice, slow and deliberate, began to wake. The verdict came quietly, but its echo was thunder. Ownership restored. The Rosendale name would remain, but under shame. That evening, Elias returned to the garden where it had all begun. The roses blooming, the air heavy with dusk. Victoria approached, her footsteps soft on the gravel. Elias smiled faintly. You just did, by speaking it. The wind carried petals across the path, scattering like blessings and farewells. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't surrender. it was reclamation. The house behind him no longer loomed. It simply stood, waiting to be redefined. Night cloaked the estate in silence again, but this silence was different, cleansed. Elias stood on the balcony overlooking the sea, the deed resting on the railing before him. He thought of his father, of the years stolen, of the dignity reclaimed not through vengeance, but through truth. Lena appeared in the doorway, her face illuminated by soft candlelight. "It's yours again," she said quiet. Elias turned to her, eyes distant but peaceful. "No," he murmured. It was never theirs to begin with. The ocean shimmered below, endless and forgiving. The past had spoken and been heard. The morning broke beneath gray clouds and camera flashes. Elias stepped from the car with the calm of a man who had nothing left to prove. Around him, reporters swarmed like restless birds, shouting questions about legacy and theft. Charles emerged seconds later, surrounded by lawyers and arrogance, his smile tight as wire. Victoria lingered behind, caught between blood and truth. The courthouse loomed above them, cold, majestic, impartial. Lena pushed through the crowd to reach Elias, whispering, "Whatever happens, your father would be proud." He nodded once, eyes fixed on the steps. The climb ahead was short, but it carried the weight of generations. The gavel's echo was thunder. The courtroom smelled of varnish, tension, and truth. Charles spoke first, his voice smooth, practiced, painting himself as the victim of deceit. Elias listened without reaction, the way the sea listens to storms it has already survived. When it was his turn, he rose, holding the faded deed in both hands. "This paper is proof," he said quietly, "but proof means nothing without memory. My father's name was erased from this house, from these records, from your comfort. I stand here not to take what's yours, but to reclaim what was never yours to begin with." For the first time, the crowd fell still, as though reverence had entered the room. The lawyer's voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Mr. Moreau, are we to believe you returned after 30 years simply for a name?" Elias met his stare. "Unblinking. Names matter," he said softly. "They hold everything men like your client try to bury." The lawyer pressed harder, throwing doubt and insult like stones. Elias didn't flinch. But when Charles leaned forward, sneering, "You're nothing but your father's pity," Elias finally looked him in the eye. "Then pity made a better man than greed ever will." The courtroom rippled, tension snapping like glass. Even the judge paused before striking the gavel again. As the sun began to set outside the tall courthouse windows, the air turned heavy with anticipation. The judge's voice broke the silence, deliberate and unshakable. "Ownership of the Rosendale estate is hereby restored to Elias Moreau." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Charles's face drained of color. Victoria closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down. Elias lowered his head, breathing deeply. Not in triumph, but in quiet deliverance. He reached into his coat and unfolded the deed once more, smoothing its creases with care. The moment was not victory. It was restoration. The gavel struck once more, and with it, a generation of deceit ended. Outside, the city pulsed with noise, but within the courtyard, there was only stillness. Reporters shouted, flashes flared, yet Elias seemed untouched by any of it. He stood beneath the old courthouse lamps, the deed folded once again and tucked safely away. Lena found him there, her expression glowing with pride and sadness. "It's over," she said. Elias smiled faintly. "No," he murmured. "It's beginning." Across the street, Victoria watched from the car, her face half hidden in shadow. A woman watching the ruins of her past and the birth of something cleaner, harder, true. The morning after the verdict, silence ruled the mansion like a ghost reclaiming its territory. The servants had gone. Curtains hung still, air heavy with absence. Charles sat in the dining room, untouched breakfast cooling beside him. The Empire had worshipped now hollow as the silverware that gleamed around him. Victoria stood by the window, pale and unmoving. "It's over," she said softly. Charles didn't answer. He stared at his reflection in the spoon, distorted, unfamiliar. The marble floors that once echoed wealth now whispered ruin. And somewhere beyond the gates, Elias walked free, not with vengeance in his steps, but with peace the Rosendales could no longer afford. Victoria wandered the garden her father once paraded as proof of perfection. The roses drooped now, petals scattered across the dirt like fallen jewels. She bent down to touch one, its softness disintegrating under her fingers. Lena appeared behind her, hesitant but kind. "You should leave this place for a while," she said. Victoria's voice broke. "It was supposed to be ours." Lena shook her head gently. "Maybe it never was." For the first time, Victoria allowed herself to cry. Not for the loss of wealth, but for the years she'd mistaken it for worth. Charles sat alone in his office, surrounded by remnants of power. The leather chairs, the half-packed boxes, the portraits of men who'd smiled like conquerors. He opened the drawer where he once hid the forged contracts and pulled out a single envelope. Inside was the first letter Henry Moreau had ever written to him, back when they were partners, before betrayal had replaced friendship. The handwriting was steady, kind. "May this home bring peace to all who dwell within it." Charles folded the paper again, his throat tight. For the first time, he felt the weight of his own ghosts pressing against his chest. Not accusing, simply waiting for acknowledgement. Elias returned at dusk, not as a beggar, not as a thief, but as the man the gates had once rejected. The emblem still bore the letter, raw, tarnished and chipped. He ran his hand across it, not with pride, but with closure. The guards were gone. No one stood to bar his way. Behind him, the city glowed faintly, a world indifferent, yet strangely just. He could have claimed the mansion that very night, could have walked through its doors and called it his. But instead, he paused. Some victories are quieter than ownership. They live in forgiveness, not conquest. Night fell heavy on the Rosendale mansion. Victoria found her father asleep in the drawing room, the fireplace long since gone cold. She covered him with a blanket, her movements slow, reverent. On the mantel, the deed sat framed beneath glass, not as a possession, but a reminder. The air was still, and for the first time, peace did not feel like punishment. She looked toward the empty chair across the room and imagined Elias sitting there, quiet, forgiving. "We built walls," she whispered. "He built truth." And the words, soft and fragile, finally set her free. The first light of dawn spread across the coast, soft and gold. Elias walked along the road that curved toward the mansion, each step echoing with the weight of years unspoken. The tide murmured below, waves folding gently against the rocks. He carried no luggage, no guards, only the envelope that had once been his burden and was now his peace. A passing driver slowed to look at him, perhaps recognizing the man from the headlines, but Elias didn't meet their eyes. He didn't need acknowledgement anymore. The world had already heard his truth. He was simply walking home. The iron gates creaked open once more, not in defiance this time, but in welcome. Elias paused before them, watching the sunlight spill through the bars like forgiveness made visible. Lena stood inside, waiting, her face lit with quiet joy. "I knew you'd come back," she said. Elias smiled gently. "This time, I didn't have to." Together they stepped beyond the threshold, where laughter had once been cruelty. The mansion no longer loomed. It listened. Even its silence had softened, as if the very walls remembered the man who had built them, not for pride, but for home. Elias stood in the study, the same room where his father's name had been erased. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, and the scent of old paper hung like memory. He opened the window, letting the sea breeze wander in. On the desk lay the framed deed, now clean, unblemished, restored. Victoria entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. "For peace," she said simply. He nodded, accepting it. For a moment they stood in stillness. Not enemies, not heirs, but witnesses to the cost of greed and the mercy of time. "He built this room for light," Elias murmured. "Now it finally has some." The garden bloomed again, the roses trimmed, the fountain alive with silver arcs of water. Elias walked its path slowly, remembering his father's voice telling him that beauty must serve kindness, or it turns cruel. Lena joined him by the fountain, her laughter light against the evening hush. "You've brought it back to life," she said. Elias shook his head. "It only needed truth." The setting sun cast fire across the sky, and in its reflection the mansion looked new. Not from wealth, but from grace. Some places are not rebuilt with hands, but with forgiveness. The night sea shimmered below the balcony, stars scattered like quiet witnesses. Elias leaned on the railing, the deed resting beside him once more. No longer a weapon, just a memory. Victoria and Lena stood behind him, silent, content. He spoke without turning. "My father once said a house becomes a home when it forgives its walls." He smiled softly, eyes glistening with reflection. "Then this place is finally a home again." The wind carried the scent of salt and roses. For the first time, the mansion slept without shame. And Elias, the man they once called a beggar, had given it back its soul.